My name is Christian Menzinger. I'm an independent, just a small introduction to myself, a small one. I'm an independent software developer and trainer, and I'm also named as Salesforce MVP, so I'm active in the community, speaking regularly on events, and also leading the developer user group in Munich. And my talk is about a little bit of Lightning Web Components and a little bit of the Lightning the User Interface API. And I want to ask a question as an introduction. So actually, what is Lightning? Because this is a fundamental understanding. It's definitely not that, as you maybe know. So this is actually not that kind of base page design as Salesforce Classic was. And to understand the power of the platform, I asked myself this question, what is Lightning? And I found a good quote from Salesforce at TrailheadX. Is actually this one here. When we decide to rebuild our UI, we didn't reskin it. We built a powerful platform that gives you even more access to customize Salesforce. That's Lightning. And this is a fundamental understanding when we talk about Lightning Web Components or we talk about Lightning Components in general, to understand that the switch from Salesforce Classic to Lightning was not just like reskinning and repainting the interface. So they really built a solid platform layer that you can use for building more sophisticated apps. And this is actually the user interface API. So the user interface API is the base layer where, for instance, Lightning Web Components are built on top of it. And this is an important picture to understand that there are different aspects. When you build applications, you should have a dig into certain technologies. And we also have like the Lightning Data Service, and then we have like the layer of all the components on top. And I will talk a little bit about the user interface API, how we can utilize the Lightning Data Service, and how you can build sophisticated interfaces using Lightning Web Components on top of these mechanics. So Lightning is actually, the core is kind of platform service, then you have UI framework, and you have some user experience on top. And all that together is actually is the power of the platform to make you more productively, making cool interfaces, and thrill actually your users. And the base layer, the user interface API, so what is the user interface API? It's actually a REST API. So you can consume the user interface API by making a REST request. And actually, you can query multiple records. So you will get back not only your record data, so you will also get back data and metadata. And actually, it's designed to build an own application, to build an own GUI, for instance, like an iOS app. So that means that the decision of building Lightning Experience is not just I have a designer and he do a little bit of CSS magic. So it was really kind of they built a solid layer, and the Lightning Experience is one implementation of the user interface API, what we refer to Salesforce Lightning. And the interesting part about this is, as I said, technically it's a REST API. You can consume it like when you build your own iOS app. But the user interface API runs in the context of the user. That's the name, user interface API. And so the user interface API is actually taking care about object permissions, for instance, CRUD access. So if you don't have access to that record, so you won't get back any data back. It takes care about the field level security, it takes care about sharing settings. So everything what you would see in the user interface when you log in as your user and you go to navigate to a record, and for instance you don't have a field level security to a certain field, so you won't see that field in the user interface, right? And exactly the same you would get when you make the request to that API and asking back, give me that record, give me that metadata information of that record, give me all the object permission and field level security, so you will get back exactly the same result. So you are relying on the metadata layer of Salesforce with that user interface API. So just an example request. So you could do this in the browser, you can authenticate, and you can just use a record ID to say, give me the record UI of this certain element. And this gives you back a lot of information. So if you go parse the response, you will get not only the record data, so you will also get all the metadata information. So like layout information. Okay, I have a page layout, the full page layout, and it contains 2 rows, and these 2 rows are filled in with these and that field, and all that information you know from Salesforce, that is actually coming back in that one single response to that user interface API. You will get a lot of information about your object. Is that object creatable? Have you access? All these stuff. So for instance, you have here a list of fields, and this is just the information of one field, account source in this case. And so you have the API name, is it a compound field, what's the field type, what's the length, all information which are important to know about when you build an interface comes back with that single response. And of course, you will also get back a lot of data, so all your record data. For instance, when you query a list view. So this is also part of the user interface API. You can say, give me all the data from that list view, and you will get back a couple of records from this list view. And this is exactly the example I want to demonstrate you. So this is kind of the base layer. So I just want to that you get a feeling that this is an API, and this is the hard way to do. Okay, so we are not digging into REST requests, but to see that there is a solid base in the technology that you can consume, and we are now, going to the next layer. So this is the base, and we're going to the next layer, and the next layer is actually the so-called Lightning Data Service. The Lightning Data Service is kind of an implementation of the user interface API, but gives you more comfort, so you don't have to do the REST request by yourself. You can use, for instance, when you develop with web components, you can use so-called base Lightning components. And the base Lightning components are easy to consume, but they do also respect everything that comes back from the user interface API. Okay, so the Lightning Data Service adds a little bit more sophisticated technology like caching, synchronization, error handling, so that you don't have to take care about when you have 2 web components on the same page, which are consuming the same kind of record data. So you don't have to request 2 times and get the response 2 times, and they're out of sync. So the Lightning Data Service takes care that it's only requested once, and if one of these 2 are changing, also the other one is updated. So there's a lot of smart implementation in this Lightning Data Service. But also the Lightning Data Service is not something you have to use directly. So you can actually use base Lightning components. So base Lightning components are built on top of this Lightning Data Service, and you maybe know also base Lightning components if you have already worked with Aura components, because you have record view, for instance, which is a component consuming at least the user interface API. And so this is the recommendation. Whenever you build Lightning Web Components which are consuming some records, this should be your first touch point. So this should be your first step to investigate if these base components are sophisticated enough for you. And so you should start with a Lightning Record Form. So the Lightning Record Form is just an easy to use, out of the box, kind of just go for it component. Because the only thing what you have to say is actually, oh, this is my record ID and this is a record of the type of account. And then you will get back all the data, the same data as you would go to a detail page to inspect actually the page layout. You will get the same layout information, the same data. So it's an out-of-the-box component, and you have at least all the data available to build your own application consuming the same technique as Salesforce is doing. If you want to have a custom layout, so you say, okay, I want to relay on the information, I want to relay on page layout information, I want to relay on field level security, all that stuff, but I want to, build an own layout, building fields from left to right or whatever. I don't want to just visualize the same page layout as we have in the record page. Then you can use the record edit form or the record view form, but then you have to lay out the components by yourself. So this is actually, as I said, when you start working with data and you do custom components, use these components and see what these components can do for you. Okay, so this is the base work. What I want to show you is a little bit more on top of this behavior. Actually, there are pre-built hooks in the Lightning Web Components framework to the user interface API. So a pre-built hook, that means that I can consume all this REST stuffy I showed you before. I can consume the data in an easy digestible way. And there are defined APIs I can use. And this is actually a snapshot from the developer documentation. And this is very interesting. When you just have a look about this, it's not only about records. So you have, of course, something like give me a record or delete a record, behaviors to not write a lot of Apex. So maybe this is the main message why you should use base Lightning components. I haven't mentioned this yet. When you use these components, you do not write any line of Apex code. Okay, so you just use these components and use the pre-built functionality. So you do not have to write Apex class, and you don't have to write tests for your Apex class. So these are all done in these components. And what we now use is actually a hook to consume one of these APIs. And so I also do not have to write an Apex class to consume this data. And this is an important message. Of course, you can do everything in Apex. This is your, the holy grail about implementing something in Salesforce. But sometimes you want to be more efficient. You don't want to, do everything by your own. You don't want to reinvent the wheel. And so this is a good starting point to work with data. So you can consume the UI record API, and you see UI API. So this is exactly user interface API. Create a record, get a record, and also something like get record create default. So you build an own, wizard to create a new record, but you want to rely on what your administrator configures for default data. And so you can consume this. Also, of course, everything about objects. Give me that pick list value, give me translations, give me localizations, all that stuff you can do with the user interface API. And I found very interesting this stuff here, which is currently in beta, get list UI. So I can consume a list view. So that means I make a request, or I can get the data back from a list view someone has configured, and I not only get back my records, I also get back the metadata. So which fields are in the list view, which order, which configuration someone has done. And this is actually my example I show you in detail, because I think that there is a lot of power in it. So we have these pre-built hooks, and to understand how to consume it, it's a little bit of code to go into Lightning Web Component implementation. It's the so-called wire service. So the wire service is just, when you go to the documentation, it's just a pre-built syntax to consume this, actually this link between your implementation and this API. As I said, of course, we can dive very deeply into code, but when you really start working with Lightning Web Components and you read a little bit documentation and you go a little bit of hands-on experience, this is really kind of okay. You just have to do it once or two or three times to really get the syntax, but this is all well documented. And the usage from that is within Lightning Web Components. So now we are on the top level layer. So Lightning Web Components is actually the state-of-the-art technology to build an interface within Salesforce. So we had Lightning Aura components, referred to Lightning components in the past. So it's a little bit of kind of, you always have to be discreet what you're talking about. When you say Lightning components, could mean nowadays actually Aura or could be Lightning Web Components. So always to be differentiated. So Lightning Web Components have been generally available since nearly a year now. And this is really the idea of not building a framework by Salesforce, building a framework which Salesforce has to maintain. So this is really kind of we adopting browser standards, because the browser has evolved. During the last years, there have been a lot of functionality baked into the browser natively. And so if you execute something which is baked in the browser natively, this is very performant. And so the browser does not have to execute and compile JavaScript at runtime and interpretate your framework to do something, so it's already done in the browser and you can just consume this. And this is the idea behind Lightning Web Components. So the main driver is actually not maintaining an own framework and having performance. And because it's web standards, if you're working in a company and you want to build something really cool in Salesforce, really cool in terms of a very cool user interface. You don't have to be a Salesforce expert to build this interface because it's web standards. So you can just go out of the market and find someone who has done web development in the couple of last years. Maybe not before, say, 4 years or 5 years, because then it's kind of a little bit of, they're also referring like to modern, what is modern JavaScript, or what is actually state-of-the-art browser technology, so what does this mean? And actually there's kind of a definition, it's kind of ECMAScript 6, so in the year 2015, so there a lot of new functionality came into the browser natively, and so you really need someone who has done web development recently. But if you have that one, it's really easy to build something at the Salesforce platform with Lightning Web Components. As I said, designed to build complex and sophisticated, not only components, also kind of single-page applications, like own applications. If you have a process, you want to guide your users with a complex or good interface for you to drive usability, because you have a complex scenario, you can build an own application with Lightning Web Components. Okay, so this is the base thing. So just to know my audience, who of you already have done some kind of Lightning Web Components development? Okay, so, who of you has done some Lightning Aura component development? Okay, that's the majority. So I've been early adopter of Lightning Aura components, and it was very, very painful in the beginning. I've been early adopter of Lightning Web Components, and Philipp and the team, you did really a great job in promoting Lightning Web Components. When they really announced it, I mean, they had a pilot, but if they really made it generally available, there have been so many resources. They built sample galleries, you can consume the Trailhead app, so they're really, really good content, and it was really kind of easy going into the concept. I mean, it's a lot of things to, get the mind around, but it's really good to go there. And in my opinion, if you don't have a certain use case to maintain an old Aura application, if you start building something, build it with Lightning Web Components. It's really kind of, it makes a difference. And so one of the things I find very interesting is exactly that I do have some hooks to that APIs, which I'm not directly can consume in Lightning Aura Components. And so I quickly show you this demo here. So I'm here in a Salesforce org, a Scratch org, and I just use the default sample data. So the only thing actually I'm done here is actually I built a list view. I named this list view special details. So you see it's just default list views, and I have my special details for certain fields because I'm interested in industry specific stuff, and so this is my information I'm really working with. And now the idea is that I can consume these data. So that means the definition of which field I have defined, which order I have defined that field, and also which filter I applied, so these record data, and I build an own interface. And so I just span up a new tab and visualize the same thing over there. And so, sorry to bear with me, I'm not a CSS god, as you can maybe see here. So most of the time I'm really happy that I have a guy which is really experienced and is really kind of, we make a customer project and I do the heavy lifting, getting the data and building the rough skeleton for Lightning Web Component. It looks like a developer has done it. And then actually he's doing some CSS magic, and it was really kind of, wow, that's not the same application. And that's what I mean. You can get people from web which are experienced to really build cool stuff. And so this is just a totally different visualization of the same data. And it's consuming the same list view. So that means when I, for instance, change my fields, I don't know, I just add another field there and remove maybe the rating. And of course, also if I'm sorting and I go back. And so it's really respecting the things I have, I defined over the list view. But this visualization, because it's Lightning Web Components, you can visualize whatever you like. You have the power to build an own totally thrilled interface but you're still relying on, for instance, in this case, on the list view, and so your admin can change it immediately, and you do not have to hard code anything in your code, and so you do not need a developer to change, like, oh, I want to add this field here to my visualization. You can build really a visualization and relying on the data. And so I quickly show you two things. The one thing is the data are coming back from that hook, just that you get an idea. And it's actually that you see that I haven't done any specific programming, or I will show you the implementation, of course, in a second. But what I got back from this user interface API hook is actually not only my rough records. I also got back this info object here, and you will find a lot of things like display columns. Okay, these are the columns I am displaying in the right order. The user the list view is actually configured to. Then you have a lot of things like what is the label, ordered by, and so on and so on. And of course you have your records. So in total I have 12 records, and I have my record data, which is there. So there's a huge data structure coming back from that call. And when I jump to my code and show you how I've implemented this example, the most JavaScript you see here is actually just to flatten down the data structure. Because one of the great differences between Aura components and Lightning Web Components is when you build a markup, you don't have any expressions with logic. So that means I cannot say I use my variable and say this is an array and give me the fifth element dot label dot something, or when my index equals 2, then do this. So like conditional rendering. So this is one of the big differences. So whenever you use your variable in your code, it has to be kind of flattened. It has to be that is my object and I'm accessing this object. So you cannot have a lot of logic in the markup, which is actually good, because when you have all the logic in JavaScript, it's more JavaScript centric. You can even test your JavaScript logic. And there is a talk from Felipe in the afternoon, I think, about testing Lightning Web Components. So this is another very essential part and another very cool thing about Lightning Web Components. So at the end, I have to write standard HTML markup with a little bit of, say, hooks to generate this dynamic data structure. And the only thing actually which is really a little bit you have to step into it is actually how you use the wire service. As I said, it's very well documented, but I just make a quick code overview. You have the wire service. I say get list UI, and this comes actually from something Salesforce has built. So I'm just consuming this. Then I have certain parameters, which I state in the developer documentation, and then I get back my data. And this is actually where I did the breakpoint in the browser, where I inspect the data, and then I have to build my own JavaScript logic to consume all the data I have. And at least the only thing I'm doing is actually I'm building a data structure which actually loops I have two loops, like I'm building a container for every record, and then I have another loop having a loop over each of the fields. And all the rest I'm just consuming from this user interface API. You can find this demo at GitHub. Here's my GitHub repo. So I don't have so many projects there, so you will find it easily. It's called FTD19 LWC UI demo. And yeah, just to summarize, when you are building with Lightning Web Components, of course, start doing something. It's really, really cool. You can do amazing things. Start with using the base Lightning components, the implementation of the user interface API from Salesforce. Then have a look at the hooks at the user interface API, and then build something to thrill your users. And as I said, here again is my the GitHub repo. Just one disclaimer that what I used here in the code get list UI is beta, so that means it could change. But I guess there will be kind of working with that will be available for sure. And with that, I want to thank you, and of course, I'm open for questions. Any questions? You're all amazed by this beauty, right? So, perfect. Have a good day, and yeah, see you outside. See you later. Thank you.